If you think about riding a bike, you could read about riding a bike, right? Have any of you read the Wright brothers book, David McCullough's book? Oh my gosh, it's such a good story. But I'm from Dayton originally, spent about a decade there, and so I'm kind of fond of the Wright brothers anyway. Incredible entrepreneurs. But when you think about riding a bike, you could read about riding a bike, or you could have a concrete experience where here and now you're actually getting on the bike and trying it, right? Usually the first time you get on a bike, you don't just take off, right? You fall. And you observe and reflect when you fall. And then you start thinking, you're conceptualizing, how can I improve it and do it better the next time? And then you get on the bike, hopefully, and you try again. And you test it, you experiment. Okay, so it's like really cyclical. And you're experimenting to learn how to ride the bike. And that's pretty much what experiential learning is. When you think about how entrepreneurs learn, it's really a problem-based learning. They're trying to solve problems. So when we say problem solving, you really want to put students in the position of solving problems that are introduced early, that stimulate those problem-solving skills. You're working in small groups. It's very student-centered, so it's the students that are focusing on it, on solving the problems, student-centered classroom. And through that process, new knowledge is obtained. Peer-to-peer learning. So most likely, like this group, you have a lot of experiences that are coming into a small group. There can be a mutual, beneficial exchange of ideas based on experiences and ideas that diverse people bring to a conversation. And that's the benefit of peer-to-peer learning. The other benefit is, for those who are faculty in the room, when you're standing in front, you're the expert in political science or whatever discipline you're teaching. It's been a long time since you first learned about your discipline. And you have a wealth of knowledge in your head that you're trying to share. It's often the novice who's just learned and come to the conclusion or reach the understanding that can better explain to the person sitting next to them how they reach that understanding. Sometimes we're so far removed from when we first understood that it's better to have a novice explain it. And so that's the real value of working in small groups or peer workshops. The real goal is to get to self-directed learning, and entrepreneurs are self-directed learners, and that means they've taken ownership of their learning, they've set their goals that they're trying to achieve, and they're going to go out and obtain more knowledge to solve the problems that they're trying to solve. I'm sorry, I've got a little cold too, so it's like real nasally, but bear with me. So this is a spectrum of going from being a dependent learner to an independent learner. When we think about dependent learners, they often depend on having an authority figure in the classroom to tell them what to do. And when you have that situation, you create dependent learners. If you only stick in that phase one, then those are often the students or the graduates that then go into the workforce and say, tell me what to do, rather than taking initiative or being self-directed. It is a process, so you can go from being a dependent learner to an interested or an involved learner, which is, if you're prompted or given a little bit of motivation, you go out on your own and seek knowledge as well, if you have an interest in the area. But the real goal is to get to independent learning, and that is the self-directed learner who's taken ownership, sets their own goals, doesn't need someone to tell them what they want to do. They know what they want to do. They're going to seek the knowledge and the resources to get there. In the classroom, you want students to be self-directed. That means that their engagement level is there and they've taken ownership of their academics. So informal versus formal learning. I'm going to show you a little video of an entrepreneur talking about the value of informal learning, which is often that experiential learning that entrepreneurs are gaining. In formal learning, we often think of the classroom of seeking knowledge or gaining knowledge. But over a lifetime, 25% of our learning will come from formal learning. I know I can do, whereas 75% really comes from that informal learning, where you're learning to adopt and adapt. You want to talk about Serena?
Yeah. So I mentioned a few minutes ago, like in the Ice House course, one of the things we did was embedded like video case studies so that there are relatable social models. In many ways, this is about developing self-efficacy. In this domain-specific self-efficacy, we know from Bandura that this is a key part of the puzzle. Like, we need to see showing Bill Gates to people exploding in entrepreneurship can do as much to discourage it would occur. So this is one taken from our hundreds of interviews we did. This was in Philly, father and daughter. Father's never graduated high school. Daughter's got some get up and go. She's worked at McDonald's. She's trying to get her, she got a learner permit at 15, her first job at 16, and found out she was pregnant in high school with twins. So kind of derailed her whole plan. They worked together to start a little trash cleaning business. They started with $200. In this segment, Serena's going to talk about how she extracted learning from every job she ever took. She just took it upon herself.
Thank you.
Good.
My father said from his experiences, every single thing that he learned, he was able to use once we started Elohim cleaning contractors. And it was the same for me. I didn't go from working on the construction sites to instantly we were in business. I started applying during the time when I was investigating, starting and getting the paperwork together. I started applying for all the jobs that I did not qualify for. I applied to jobs like President of Human Resources, Director of Marketing, and I had to be 19 maybe, but it was all so that I could eventually have my own business. And I figured if I could get an opportunity where I could learn from the people that were doing it, and I could just, even if it was an eavesdrop on a conversation, I could use those things to help with this business. And that's ultimately what ended up happening. Well, I ended up working for Morgan Stanley Dean Witter. I thought that I actually wanted to be a financial advisor. Like, I thought I was going to be a broker, and that's how I was going to get to that 6 figures and all that. So I applied for a job at Morgan Stanley, started as a temp, became a financial sales assistant, took my Series 7 test and everything, like really was going to pursue that. I worked for, a headhunter found me and I moved to Advest, which is another financial firm bought by Merrill Lynch recently. So I worked for these two huge financial firms, and that's where I started to understand how business is organized. And I was responsible for processing other individuals' checks for $30,000 so that they could go shopping. And, I was the one responsible for opening up these IRA accounts and SEP IRAs. So I was exposed to more, which allowed me to now be able to use more to go back and help start and put together the components of the business. Every single job, and this is the way I've always looked at my jobs, as a young person, working at jobs that I didn't technically qualify for. Everything they gave me access to, I used in helping to grow my own business. From McDonald's to the construction site. McDonald's, I learned how to multitask, I learned customer service, I learned how to count money. All those skills, very necessary in what I do today. And sometimes as a young person, you can feel like you may have a job that's irrelevant. I don't want to do this the rest of my life. Well, that job, you don't have to. And that job will bring out some things in you that you never really knew that you had. And they're all skills and abilities that you can use to do your own thing. Not only that, you become such a much more well-rounded person.
So we just wanted to share that perspective from an entrepreneur who went on to be successful, but even in her McDonald's days of taking experiences and pulling knowledge from them.
Every time I watch that, I still draw, what's going on for her is she's operating from an internal locus of control, but she doesn't know what that means. She has no idea how that happened, but she's operating from an assumption like, no one's going to do this for me. I've got to figure it out.
So some results that we're seeing in studies from entrepreneurial learning is increased student motivation, student engagement, improved self-confidence, drive to learn. The World Economic Forum talks about entrepreneurship as an essential life skill that every student will need to thrive in the 21st century. Harvard Business Review within the last year talks about the need to invest in and scale entrepreneurship education. Business creation is not the only beneficial outcome. In fact, it actually leads to higher academic achievement in other academic areas. That was based on a New York study, based on 100,000 students who went through entrepreneurship programming. 90% of those students learning entrepreneurial skills to academic success in other subject areas, and 95% saw them as life skills. And finally, the Chronicle of Higher Education in May 2015, their headline journal article was "Everyone's an Entrepreneur. How do we create more self-starters in students? We really need to move it from the perimeter of education, business division, to the core of how we operate. To create those work-ready graduates and next-generation innovators." And I don't think the fellows here who asked how does the World Economic Forum define entrepreneurship, I think we had the lead when we heard the first session. World Economic Forum has a great chart on what are 21st century skills. And that list of skills, which is basically what was in the search column for those of you who were here for Gary's first presentation, of the creative critical thinking, the collaboration, the effective problem-solving skills, those empathy, those are entrepreneurial skills, and that's how the World Economic Forum defines them. All of that to say, and I'm going to hand it back over to Gary, is facilitator's role really to create those independent learners. To be a facilitator in the classroom, you want to lead but not dominate. You don't want to be the authority figure in the classroom. You want to provide guiding questions, encourage self-directed learning, create that safe space to actually solve problems. We're going to share with you the tool now on how to create that safe space and work to solve problems in an entrepreneurial way, and then be prepared to ask follow-up questions. And so we often say, like in a classroom or any kind of learning environment, that the teacher should be learning as much from the student as the students are learning from the teacher, because we all bring those experiences into the classroom.
Great.
Let me introduce the process and we'll get the tool going.
So, thank you, great.
Yeah.
So for those of you who just stepped in the second session here, we're defining entrepreneurship as a search process, where an individual is searching for the intersection between what he or she cares about and what other people need. So it's very broadly defined as search. As Clayton Christensen says, we're really good at teaching delivery skills, and what we need now are discovery skills. And these are skills that anyone can develop, which are skills that we historically overlooked or ignored. I found it great, the head of Google Education, Jaime Cassatt, been ripping him off lately. I heard him tweet this, I saw him tweet this. Stop asking your students what they want to be when they grow up, and start asking them what problems they want to solve and what they're going to need to learn in order to solve those problems. And so the underlying ethos of entrepreneurial activity is sort of predicated on the assumption that it's my responsibility to figure out how to make myself useful to my fellow humans. That's sort of this raw, tacit underpinning that sort of leads to the activity. And I want to just draw down on something that Bree brought out, is that when we look carefully, almost from an anthropological perspective, what entrepreneurs, how they learn in the wild, so to speak, is self-directed, problem-based, peer-to-peer, self-directed learning. They don't know that's what they're doing. They're not saying, oh yes, I'll follow, Dewey or Kolb or any of these people, but they're having this experience, like a frustration. Something's not working, something doesn't make any sense. They're kind of investigating, like, what if we did it this way? They're experimenting and they're adapting perfectly well. Lays over Kolb. It lays over problem-based learning, which comes out of medical school. Important here again is the student-centric portion of it is the student gets to pick the problem that they solve. It can't be what we tell them to solve. You want to understand the engagements because the entrepreneur is pursuing something they own. So the facilitator's role is an important part. Not so much how to facilitate, but it's the absence of authority that's a very important component here. To create self-directed, experiential, problem-based learning, we have to eliminate authority. We can't keep telling people what to do, when to do it. Anybody look at Alfie Cohn's work, Punished by Rewards? Anyone seen this? Yeah, right? The devastating effects of authority and external rewards on intrinsic motivation. Students love to read, they love, they're offered rewards. Domino's, Alfie Kohn talked about this in the book. Domino's Pizza started this program for at-risk kids. Let's give them pizzas for reading books over the summer. Well, guess what happened? We wound up with like fat kids that don't like to read. Because the kids are selecting the books with the least amount of print and the most pictures and the biggest print, and they retain less of what's in the book than students who are reading the same book without the reward expectation. And when the reward expectation is eliminated, there's less of an interest in doing it than there was before the reward was paid, right? This has been measured in children and adults. A very important part of it. So the facilitation piece is, we're coming from Bandura here, right? This is against self-efficacy. You need some kind of traction. You need an early mastery experience. It doesn't come too early. It's got to come through effort, not too easily. Because if it comes easily, you'll give up when it gets hard. You got to see through effort. This is sort of Carol Dweck stuff. You got to see through effort it works. You need relatable social models, and you need a facilitator believing in you, telling you that you can do it. Right? And lastly, we also need to be able tools to self-regulate our emotions. As I mentioned in my earlier session, humans are hardwired to avoid ambiguity. And the willingness and the ability to continue down a path of ambiguity requires some self-regulation. We'll get off. We'll make decisions against our own interest to avoid that ambiguity. So let's remove the authority rather than the sage on the stage, we become a God inside. So, opportunity discovery process, like how do entrepreneurs do what they do? I said in my early talk, it's basically a search process. What I didn't mention in my first talk, I'll mention now. These are generally speaking, we define entrepreneurship as a search process requiring search skills. What's more important that what I'm demonstrating here is that search skills are skills anyone can learn to develop through practice and repetition. They're skills most of us have never really been encouraged to develop. What's also very, very important is what is not listed here. You do not need an MBA from Stanford. You don't need to be a hacker with, technology skills. You don't need access to venture capital. You don't need a big idea. You don't need to be a genius with some scientifically unvaluable traits. You don't even need a desire to do business at all. I said it before, earlier, and I'm say it again. You need to disconnect entrepreneurial activity from energy. This is associated with business. Not every person wants to start a business. Most people want to be engaged in work. They want to have a voice, they want to have autonomy, and they want to have a chance to increase the quality of their own life. So, what we've created is a methodology, a simple tool for educators to kind of answer Jaime Casal's question, right? What problems do you want to solve, and what do you need to learn in order to solve those problems? And I'm going to play this very brief, about a 4-minute sketchbook from Stephen Johnson about where ideas come from. Again, many of you were not here in my first talk, but they're dispelling the notion that ideas are like big ideas that are obvious at the beginning. This will sort of help reinforce, like ideas aren't obvious. They're almost never obvious at the beginning. They take a long time.
For the past 5 years, I've been investigating this question of where good ideas come from. It's the kind of problem I think all of us are intrinsically interested in. We want to be more creative. We want to come up with better ideas. We want our organizations to be more innovative. I've looked at this problem from an environmental perspective. What are the spaces that have historically led to unusual rates of creativity and innovation? And what I've found in all of these systems, there are these recurring patterns that you see again and again that are crucial to creating environments that are unusually innovative. One pattern I call the slow hunch. The breakthrough ideas almost never come in a moment of great insight, in a sudden stroke of inspiration. Most important ideas take a long time to evolve, and they spend a long time dormant in the background. It isn't until the idea has had 2 or 3 years, sometimes 10 or 20 years to mature, that it suddenly becomes accessible to you and useful to you in a certain way. And this is partially because good ideas normally come from the collision between smaller hunches, so that they form something bigger than themselves. So you see a lot in the history of innovation, cases of someone who has half of an idea. There's a great story about the invention of the World Wide Web and Tim Berners-Lee. This is a project that Berners-Lee worked on for 10 years. But when he started, he didn't have a full vision for this new medium he was going to invent. He started working on one project as a side project to help him organize his own data. He scrapped that after a couple of years, and he started working on another thing. And only after about 10 years did the full vision of the World Wide Web come into being. That is, more often than not, how ideas happen. They need time to incubate, and they spend a lot of time in this partial hunch form. The other thing that's important when you think about ideas this way is that when ideas take form in this hunch state, they need to collide with other hunches. Oftentimes, the thing that turns a hunch into a real breakthrough is another hunch that's lurking in somebody else's mind. And you have to figure out a way to create systems that allow those hunches to come together and turn into something bigger than the sum of their parts. That's why, for instance, the coffee house in the age of the Enlightenment, or the Parisian salons of modernism, were such engines of creativity, because they created a space where ideas could mingle and swap and create new forms. When you look at the problem of innovation from this perspective, it sheds a lot of important light on the debate we've been having recently about what the internet is doing to our brains. Are we getting overwhelmed with an always connected, multitasking lifestyle? And is that going to lead to less sophisticated thoughts as we move away from the slower, deeper, contemplative state of reading, for instance? Obviously, I'm a big fan of reading. But I think it's important to remember that the great driver of scientific innovation and technological innovation has been the historic increase in connectivity and our ability to reach out and exchange ideas with other people, and to borrow other people's hunches and combine them with our hunches and turn them into something new. That really has, I think, been, more than anything else, the primary engine of creativity and innovation over the last 600 or 700 years. And so yes, it's true we're more distracted. But what has happened that is really miraculous and marvelous over the last 15 years is that we have so many new ways to connect and so many new ways to reach out and find other people who have that missing piece that will complete the idea we're working on, or to stumble serendipitously across some amazing new piece of information that we can use to build and improve our own ideas. That's the real lesson of where good ideas come from. The chance favors the connected mind.
So I hope this is helpful. I think for a lot of people, they think, big ideas kind of come in a moment of inspiration. And if the idea is not obvious at the beginning, you're just going to throw it out. And I think this is a useful piece to help reinforce the idea. I encounter people all the time that say, "Isn't entrepreneurship just about luck?" And this question is often posed to me with arms folded. And I'd like to answer it like this. Yes, luck is a factor, but let's quantify that. If you're thinking it's like I'm walking down the street one day and a bolt of lightning comes out of the clouds and I have an idea, now I'm rich. Like, no, you got it wrong. It's more like this, that there's an underlying, deeply held, largely unconscious assumption that I can figure out how to create something useful for my fellow human. Right? So there's an underlying, it's not about like, oh, I want to open a coffee shop because it'll be fun and easy and I hate my boss. It's about trying to solve a problem for other people, right? And what entrepreneurs are actually doing is what I'll call it's micro experimentation. It's lots and lots of little experiments that take a few minutes or a few dollars or a few days, or maybe a few $100s. When people talk about failure, I cringe because they tend to frame failure as if like, oh, you got to fail your way to business. How many houses do I have to lose? How many bankruptcies do I have to file? No, no, no. It's a micro-experimental process of testing things. But it's fear and complacency and the assumption of complete knowledge that prevents us from doing that. Environmental reasons. We've looked at this closely, the methodology. How many of you are familiar with human-centered design? Familiar with that? That's really what this is, sort of democratized. Right? We're taking sort of business vernacular out of it because we're trying to remove the assumption that because you're entrepreneurial, you're going to start a business. I'll tell a quick story. I was invited to Bogota to train teachers at the Ministry of Education in Colombia made entrepreneurship education a mandate. And they invited me in to do a 2-day seminar for about 350 educators, high school. And the lady who invited me there met me at the airport in Bogota getting my luggage, and she had come to our training at the Kaufman Foundation. That's how she learned about our work. And she said, you know, Gary, I should tell you you're not in Kansas anymore. I just need to warn you, kind of like the Carolyn conversation, right? You're not in Kansas anymore. In Colombia, the idea of emprendimiento is not good. Like there's a leftist kind of look, like the entrepreneur is an evildoer, someone who takes advantage of others for his or her own gain, which is not uncommon also in the U.S. And these are teachers that are beaten down by the system. They're looking at this like this is just another mandate. And I was asking her, like, when is the next flight out of Bogota? And it was really a threshold for me because I was met by 300. This is a training we did through translators in a booth. I'm not fluent in Spanish, and I was thinking, oh my God, I'm going to get skewered. And I had 350 teachers looking at this. And I began to explain that entrepreneurship is a search process. All we're trying to do is help students, help you learn how to search for the intersection between something you know about, care about, like and what other people need. And involve them in the process. And by the second day, they were coming up and hugging me, asking to have my picture taken next to the Colombian flag with tears about how empowering these ideas were. A big part of our challenge is to redefine what it means to be entrepreneurial. We've analyzed this very closely, again, to get away from the idea that this requires any specific set of traits. There's 3 distinct phases, beginning with following the told thing. Starts with observation inquiry, right? I say to students, this is autopilot off. Click off all the default settings. Even if you're working at a minimum wage job, in addition to doing what's asked of you, look up and figure out what's going on and start thinking. Start at least the mental exercise of understanding the system and understanding what's going on and what's not working and how might this be done better. Then it starts with experimentation, the micro-experimentation starts. The entrepreneurs that fail, they ignore the first part. They have a solution and they go running out looking for a problem.
Yeah.
And then lastly, the advocacy and implementation piece. This is a whole nother kettle of crazy. Coming up with a good idea is relatively easy, and most people think if I have a good idea, everyone's going to run out of their houses and buildings and embrace me and start throwing money at me. It's really, really, really hard to advocate and push an idea out into the world. Humans are highly resistant to change. Look at the history of innovation. Schopenhauer said this in the 1800s. Every truth must pass through 3 phases. First, we're ignored, then we're ridiculed, ultimately we're celebrated, and our ideas are looked upon as self-evident truth. If you're not psychologically prepared for this, if you expect I'm going to walk out the door, I read all these social media things about these Uber things that just go to overnight multi-billion-dollar valuation, you're not really prepared to undertake this process. So we created this tool drawing from best practices from Alexander Osterwalder, human-centered design. Come on, you guys.
Fill all the chairs and, sorry, we're going to disrupt you just for a sec to bring everybody in.
Perfect timing, we're just introducing the campus.
Yeah.
So that's why we wanted them right now, so,
That's
yeah,
good.
so hang on one second. Because I want to hear that. That's if you needed to point that out.
How many of you guys have heard of a business model canvas? How many of you have? So I think a business model canvas, this is a very useful tool if you're in a business course. And we took, I helped facilitate a startup weekend. Anyone been to a startup weekend? Yeah?
We've got about 10 more, so hang on.
Okay.
I was even keep talking, but don't start.
Yeah. And I was in Nicosia in Cyprus. It's the capital city in Cyprus, and I was working with about 100 young Cypriots. Late 20s, early 30s, college educated, very excited about coming up with ideas and doing things. And when they got the business model canvas, they stopped cold. What is a segment? What is a market? What is a channel? They didn't know the terms. It was all foreign. And this helped inform our understanding of how this process works. And we created a tool that basically strips out the business bias. This is a tool I want you to think of like a divining rod. In the entrepreneurial process, like there's no roadmap, and this formulaic attempts to teach entrepreneurship, you typically fail. What you need to navigate uncertainty and ambiguity is a compass rather than a map. So you're going off in the jungle in like uncharted territory. This is a tool that'll help you search for a problem-solution fit, which is the way we're defining entrepreneurship. Does that make sense to you guys? Just walk in, right? Good. We ready to go?
No, we've got a couple more.
Okay.
About 5 more people, so
You
let's
guys
just
have any questions so far? Let me just take advantage of the break. Any questions, comments? So I'm going to ask you a question now, like what problems do you want to solve?
Right.
Right spot. Any other questions? How many of you have an interest in being entrepreneurial? What does that mean to you?
Well, it depends. I mean, like, I just want to get up and do my own thing.
Well said.
No difference for
I want to do my own thing, right? Right? But I was saying earlier, like most people don't want to be told what to do, right? But we'll kind of make that bargain in a certain context. Anyone else?
I guess I'm more interested in entrepreneurship as a way to really for nonprofit organizations and starting out my own nonprofit organization.
So what does that look like? Can you say a little more about, like, is there a specific problem you want to do?
Part of the issue that I want to do is reduce the rate at which animals enter shelters. So instead of looking at it as the active solution of taking animals at a shelter and adopting them privately, rescuing them, look at preventing them from entering the animal shelter through providing financial veterinary training services to lower income status families who would like to keep their pets and have a strong bond and love for them, but just don't have the resources to care for them.
Gotcha. So you have a clear problem you want to solve. Awesome. Anyone else? How many have like no intention of ever being an entrepreneur? Awesome. Awesome. You guys have been why not? Anyone why not? So, do you think you'll have to be entrepreneurial, or are those things like mutually exclusive? Anyone else? Yeah, we get asked a lot, like, how do you distinguish entrepreneurship and innovation? And if I'm gonna back up one step, like the innovation part is only part of it, right? It's the middle part. Where I would say it's the first two. Innovation is first recognizing the problem. What we're learning now is coming from UC Berkeley that problem finding is more important than problem solving. And so this is something employers are looking for. One survey showed this was the CEOs were asked, this is the number one skill. It's not problem solving, it's problem finding. It's finding the right problem to solve, right? What really matters is important. So we ready to go, Bree?
Yeah.
Okay, good. I'm gonna keep going. So I'm saying that because I want, like, for those of you who weren't here in the first session, like I want you to think about entrepreneurship as just like finding the intersection between what you care about and what other people need. And by defining it as sort of a searching process that requires search skills, you can now apply it within any context. I mentioned earlier I adopted a kid that dropped out of school and I taught him how to start a little construction site cleaning business when he was 16 years old in high school. And when he graduated from high school, he went from a 1.7 GPA to a 3.4 in 1 year, in part because of this entrepreneurial experience. You're going to hear from him in a moment. And he talks about how the entrepreneurial experience kind of shifted his locus of control. But more importantly, what he told me is that, when he left high school, he joined the Marines. And he said, when I got in the Marine Corps, I applied the same fundamental logic, and it looked like this. I figured out who the stakeholders were. I started to observe and figured out what their problems were. And I went about starting to figure out how to try and solve those problems without being asked to do so. Very important, he said, I took a lot of shit from my friends for this. But 4 years later, he came out of the Marine Corps with a glowing recommendation to his commanding officer, begging him not to leave. He described the Marine Corps, by the way, as the post office for dummies. It's a very bureaucratic organization. So I use this as an example to demonstrate you can apply these concepts within any context. I don't care where you're going in this world, you're going to be required to identify and solve problems in resource-constrained, ambiguous circumstances. The entrepreneurial process will help you develop problem-solving skills. Make sense? So here's the tool, right? Let's first focus on the problem. What problem do you want to solve? Who has the problem? Everybody is not an answer. Who has the problem? And how are they solving it now? So let's just take these 3 questions This is meant to document, get your basic hypothesis out of your head onto this document. Don't tell anybody I told you this. What entrepreneurs do is actually the scientific method. Get the hypothesis out of your head. This is the diagnostic. What happens when you prescribe without diagnosing? You get sued for malpractice. So this is about understanding the problem. So what we're asking students to do is document the problem you want to solve. And don't get too far into the solution until you really understand the problem, right? And then get out of the building and talk to lots of people. 50 is a good number. Who had the people you described right here. Right? So you can say, I have a better understanding of this problem. Right? Focus first on the problem, get out of the building, talk to the people you listed in box 2, come back. Once you understand the problem, start to focus on a solution. How can we improve the solution here? Right? How is our solution then improving? This question, will people pay for your solution? I don't care if you change the question. It's what evidence can we point to that what we've created is useful? Some type of currency. It doesn't have to be money. It means my boss wants to implement this idea. People are talking about it. People are using my tool. They're using this system. This is an improvement. I have some kind of evidence that what I've created is useful. And then lastly, focusing about broadcasting that and encouraging. Once you sort of, this section is about validating a problem, solution, fit. This is about connecting beyond the environment. This is beyond the initial experiments. This is about experimentation, adaptation. Once you feel like you've got something, then it's about getting out and advocating for your idea and pushing it out in the world. So that's the tool. Now, this is a domain, this is an exercise that's largely unfamiliar to most people. And we put this, we included this. Have anyone seen this matrix between consciousness and competence? Anyone seen it before? Yeah? No? So when you start a new skill, like I started swimming 20 years ago, and I hopped in the pool and started thrashing my way up and down the pool, and I had no idea that I sucked. And so I was not aware that I sucked. Until one day, like a really skilled swimmer got in the pool next to me, and I became aware that I sucked. Right? I was incompetent and unconscious of my incompetence. At that moment, I became aware, like, oh man, that's how you swim, right? Then through persistent action and asking this guy, can you teach me what you're doing? With concentrated effort, I learned to improve. I mean, ultimately, I can hop in the pool and now I'm that guy. Right? I can swim. It looks effortless on the surface. The same is true of entrepreneurial activity. On the surface, it looks like it's a natural thing. It came through persistent work. So this is Jason. This is the boy that I adopted when he was 16. He's now 30 years old. He came back. He had this experience. I taught him how to start a little construction site cleaning as a side gig while he was in high school. His GPA went up. Once he was in the Marine Corps, a few weeks after he left, I received a presidential citation for academic achievement signed by the President of the United States. He came back from Iraq very disillusioned, but committed to solving problems. Took his GI Bill, went to San Francisco State University, and got a degree with honors in foreign relations with a minor in economic development. Because the problem he saw sitting on a rooftop in Fallujah was that we're not going to solve these problems with violence, that if these folks have economic opportunity and hope, we won't need to be here. And now he's going to talk about the entrepreneurial experience shifting his mindset from seeing himself as a busboy to influencing foreign policy.
I think you can understand on an intellectual level the things that you have to do to achieve whatever goals or attain whatever success you want. Like, you could have a recipe for it, and it can make a lot of sense, and you could predict that, yes, these things would work. But going out and executing on that is often a difficult thing, and that's where things get difficult. That'll make you really uncomfortable. It took a lot for me to take the concept of my business, my construction tech cleaning business, and go out and interact with people in a way that I was not in any way comfortable with doing. And I think that's where a lot of people stop cold in their tracks and retreat back to what they know is familiar. But if you don't do that, you're never going to achieve the results that you want. And it is uncomfortable, and I acknowledge that. But what people have to remember is that it's not going to kill you, you know. At least in most circumstances. You can push through that. You can push through that discomfort. And I've done it in a lot of different ways in different aspects of my life. The Marine Corps was a great example of that in terms of sheer physical difficulty. You'd be amazed what the human body can do physically. And the same is true of learning new habits and new ideas and new processes. And if you can just push yourself through the discomfort of any new thing that you're trying to learn, any new environment that you put yourself in, once you get used to that, you're golden, and then you go and do it again and push yourself further down a pathway to success or whatever you want. So going from seeing myself as a bar back or a busboy at a restaurant to my goal now of working on economic development policy, I think probably one of the pivotal moments in that, because that's a huge swing, I recognize that. One of the pivotal moments, I think, was when I got my first job as a business owner, having started my own business, and it worked. It made all the limits go away. It wasn't just it really removed the limits. And so from then, I just kind of, if I could do that, why couldn't I do any number of other things? And when you take that attitude so far and you just keep having cumulative success that builds and builds and builds, it just makes it impossible. And now at this point in my life, where I am with my international work experience, Marine Corps experience, and my academic experience, working on development policy doesn't seem far-fetched at all. But as a 16-year-old kid in a restaurant, bussing tables, it wasn't really on my horizon anyway.
So just wanted to demonstrate an example. Getting out, talking to strangers, pushing the limits of what's social norms is difficult. And that's what stops us. It's not the lack of money, it's not the lack of a big idea. It's really inertia and fear and complacency. The really important part here is that you actually understand that good ideas take a long time to catch on. They don't arrive fully formed, and it takes lots of iterative experimental effort, right? And when ideas do succeed, it's often in a way was never intended. The products and services, the idea morphs, right? It's bought by people you never anticipated. It's used for purposes you never thought. Let me translate this in a different way. Your original idea is going to suck. It's going to be flawed. And no amount of planning will enable you to figure it out. What they teach in business school is to know before you go, to figure everything out and then act on that information. What entrepreneurial learning is more about is getting some basic knowledge and learn you know because you go. And that's what will empower you to solve difficult problems. You'll find solutions that no amount of planning, Google research is going to allow you to figure out. Does that make sense? It's completely contrary to the way most of us have been taught to think, which is figure everything out before we go. So what we want to do now is get you guys into the process of solving problems. I want to put one last slide up here to reinforce what I'm saying. You guys are the innovators. Not everybody's going to buy in. There's about 13.5% of the population. Those are the early adopters. Good ideas die because we expect everybody to buy in. We're not psychologically prepared for resistance. And how do you separate signal from noise? How do you separate a hater from valuable feedback? How do you separate a late majority from an early adopter? The answers aren't clear. You're going to have to figure it out. Make sense? You guys ready to dive in? Yeah? Not all at once now. Yeah? Okay, great, fabulous. So, the question that we came here to solve is how can we incorporate experiential or entrepreneurial learning into the classroom, into the academic experience at the University of Akron. So do you guys want to break up and work in teams and try to identify ways or problems you can solve in your learning experience to make it more experiential? You guys up for it?
Do you guys want to offer some clarifying focus? Because you have you have like a very more specific problem you're trying to solve as well, because it doesn't have to be this problem. Are you trying?
We sort of thought that we were going to be looking at actual course syllabi and trying to see how we could incorporate our own ideas of how to include gender, basically, and feminist ideology as a mode of analysis into outside classes, outside women's studies.
So all of you guys want to solve that one problem?
So, if I could,
That's fine. But
yeah, we don't actually have a stack of available syllabi with us, which would have been a cool thing to do, but we can try. We're also trying to figure out how to use what we learned from ELI in something like a hackathon of real duration in the early summer. So you could really help us by trying out some ideas. We don't have the actual syllabi, so it might make the most sense to let, I'm guessing here, it's correct, I don't do what you do. In small groups, so let each person volunteer a course that they're in now and describe it.
Oh, okay.
And then, but since we're focused on experiential learning, it'd be great if you could think gender and experiential learning
Okay.
together, where the intersection is.
What do you think about feminist activism in relation to different courses that you guys have had, and how you would incorporate that kind of viewpoint in those courses?
Whatever.
So what I'd like you guys to do is like break up into small groups, and I think Carolyn, to your point, like talk about like where's a class where you saw the problem. Like it doesn't have, you don't have the syllabi. What was like a really boring class or where these ideas weren't incorporated?
Yeah.
And just like how could this be done differently?
So
Start there.
you might have to, in your small group, given time constraints, let one person stand and breathe and think about your experiences this or last semester, and then let one person lead a little bit with an example. Otherwise, it could just become a sort of, oh, but in my, oh, but in does that work?
So you want groups of 3 or 4? What are we talking about here?
4?
4? Okay. Do you all just want to?
And we have people who are not from the class, so take one of them into your group. Don't make them be a group unto themselves.
You can move the chairs around, and we also have this awesome like projector there, and the stools will actually record.
And this workshop does go till 5, so I know some of what time the students have to leave.
Yeah, our class is over at 4:30, so you all have about a half an hour to do this, so you're welcome to stay after. I know that some of you have to go immediately, but it's about 4 o'clock now. So I'll let you all know when it's 4:30, and you can decide if you want to stay and continue your conversations, or if you need to go.
So for the time constraint, try to keep it, stay in problem and solution, right? Talk about the problem and then start to think about how you might solve it differently. And then can we reconvene? What do you think time-wise? When should we reconvene? How many of you have to leave here at 4:30? Most of you. Okay. So let's try to do this. We're going to have to just cram this into like the next 20 minutes. And talk about, like I want you guys to represent, talk about kind of what you came up with, right?
No, I'm making a
Okay, then I'll be in this room. So someone want to talk about class next?
Okay, well,
So this is the
I don't think it's actually just for all, given the flexibility, but also just given
more specific.
What's that?
So what's the problem? It's just that you don't understand Oh, so you're taking, like, you're not a law student, but you're taking a class about like
It's not here.
Your schedule from the meeting. And I don't know about choice jobs, but it's really tough to
The archaeology and water provides a different ways of manipulating and managing water throughout history. And different technologies and like water management is something different. Which it was something that's being taught by and so her experience as a student is teaching them, which is really interesting to see. And it's really like she's really good about being interactive and like, is this working for you guys? Is this not working for you guys? And
That's good.
yeah, she's like making stuff. She wasn't really sure how sprinklers were. Also, I think a lot of like students understand. I remember my first semester, I was just like, okay, there's just lists everywhere. Like a bunch of big things. And so now she's like making that more transparent. Like here are the meetings. This is because we can hear PowerPoints. Yeah, she just makes it more than just the class presentation material.
Students are like starting to solve social
And so being able to say,
problems,
like, okay,
topics,
this is how
social ventures, they're
she's
solving
really
problems.
receptive about that because she is like professionally made student, whereas a lot of other professors are like, this is it. You didn't give us any
what we're talking about, like not like, do you think that that's gonna be a problem? Is that person is so set in their ways, they're gonna like teach the same that way?
Problem accommodating, he's very now that problem solving.
Well, that's what that is, right? It's like, now let's go show you how you do how you do.
The absence of
The problem is that.
So naturally, there are some professors who are willing to do this schedule all the time. In 2 weeks, you would have a progressive workshop.
Same problems with these, kind of here's what it's going to be. This is search, required search. And then it's so like, there, and they have to start over again. Then students have to figure out that's what kind of threw me. Oh, now I gotta move it, I gotta start over.
Yeah, I mean, from a learning standpoint, the idea is that that study is going to help you and right, it's either going to broad your horizons, either you actually
Most of the styles in the class are programmers or archaeology focused. So it's going to, it gives them examples of studies done on site and how you conduct the research process and where
You're not just gonna force your idea.
now we're like getting out of the
You have to see the first time.
Yes.
I mean, I think
Probably too late at that point.
Those are all stuff that you're going to use on classes that just have to be books and then write about them later. Our intent is to teach you not necessarily about what information about these books, but how to process information. And one of the things that really is that are so again, that's what we're
I mean, it's really like, yes, to take the like, is that especially if you're gonna be very like, consistent to this, is there a way to like, almost like just turn their existing process into a workshop, like with their solution? Is there a way for like a student to take a workshop experience of like themselves and then like
that it's actually
So, in this you said over So it wasn't a matter of
we're going to make like a little wristband that say WWUCD. Right? Talk about barriers. Right? It's like a reminder. I don't have
to this point, not very progressive, and it's very locationally and dynasty based, so it's really that page.
So it's going different.
Yeah, but they're
It's going different.
Like today, our responsibility is let's develop for supplying water to the so they're the ones that put out miles and then walk miles back and carry. Whenever you go, like there's a home, there's like jugs of water.
in the textual evidence of because by the time it's textual evidence, it's because somebody has taught somebody has taught somebody. How to tell my story as a kid. Very good. They don't have any like native society. 9:55. I've been waiting till 5:30.
Anywhere you want to know,
Yeah, very well. I mean, that's the out, because women are the ones who tend to be held accountable for things as family and by the water they're currently as president. So there's the ones who primarily
Just going to talk about
no worries at all, because that this will help with some of the so like all of these things that we have to no question of whether I use that as a mode of analysis when bringing life. So our biggest challenge is in a very gender day way
You never believe who started? Scott. Scott Johnson of Boston, he's at the Wednesday night here in Christian's office. So he saw him laying there, he picked him up today. Nobody lost anything. And I'm sure he didn't take them because he wanted to open up any doors.
That's the whole, that's part of the point we're trying to do. Okay. So that's one thing. How does society function in this way? Yeah. It's kind of part of the figure out how.
assume in general is because I've taken the labor and the time to investigate like how people did something, how much more do you want to need? They decide how much to do. So here's the story, okay, we started this thing and it was like, oh yeah, I'm just studying history as far as we actually investigated through that to that and everything was said wrong. That male it does mislead whereas you're already spending time.
I mean, those men were, like, fishing, fighting on the boat. Well, you the American society, women's reaction is far less. But within European society, I don't know which way it was. But it's sort we're these ones that I could go
But it has, I mean, it just has been a very common, if you bring something up science, then it does assume that male default. And so it changes to female, and then that plays on. Or not having a scientific knowledge.
Everybody sign it?
I mean, I think recognizing all participants' experiences rather than just saying they or inclusive and everything. You should acknowledge that people participated and investigate the ways in which because I mean, how many times have you guys looked through the classes and everyone listening? Or first off, but it has it sounds like this like the black person is doing the same thing for 5 years. It's probably like he knows exactly what to say, and so he's not questioning it, so he doesn't filter it through the same questions he probably have for it, and that's just like, and then there's like he has this set of experiences. I didn't know it now. Alright, you guys ready? And they like question it today, and their students are questioning it.
So, who's ready to share some ideas, like what problems you want to solve?
In my group, 3 or 4 of us are English majors, and a common problem we noticed is that on like the syllabi, unless the class is specific
So let me ask you a question. I started using that canvas. That canvas is a really loose guide. Like, make up your own questions. It's just meant to like keep the inquiry process going. Like, so what could be some next steps? Like, get out of here. Like tonight, tomorrow, the next day. What would you do to further understand the problem?
Who is speaking? I'll let me raise your hand. Okay, well, how would you, so can you kind of summarize the problem and then tell me what discipline it's you're moving?
In the English department, unless the class is specifically about a demographic that isn't white men, the writing that you read tends to all be written by white men, not any women's, like racial minorities.
Gender bias in English. So just quickly, like some ideas from the rest of us, the peer-to-peer part, like how would you continue this discovery? Like why is this happening? And like how would you continue on that discovery process? Like outside of here.
Well, I group over here, like, we came to the conclusion that, like, when growing up, like, if your girls are supposed to do this, guys are supposed to do this, so, like, girls aren't going to be writing and being, like, English, like, majors, like, even though, like, you choose to, like, you're going to be, like, in social work, like, trying to be with children and be a nurse and do other stuff like that involves people. You're just shy away from it. So you're not going to have many English writers, so you can start that off and make someone feel comfortable enough to get into it.
So I hear what you're saying, but what I'm asking is like, so you're saying there's a gender bias in the English curriculum, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so who created that curriculum?
White men.
Okay, so there we're getting somewhere. Like, this is about the inquiry process. Like those white men, like maybe you want to go like just talk to them and understand like where they're coming. Maybe they're not even aware of it, or whatever. But this is like the inquiry and understanding part. First, to better understand the problem before you start. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Just an example. Who else has something?
In my major, I'm working with like two girls that are majors in the department. I'm a philosophy major, so that's predominantly I'm male field. So for me, trying to solve that problem, head of my department is female, but she's the only woman in the department. So for me, like when I got the opportunity to be the president of our philosophy club, I took the opportunity because I feel like other people, when you see someone in a position of power in any given field, it makes it an opportunity for you in your own mind. So, you know, I question if a woman wasn't in my department, would I consider going to grad school and teaching philosophy an option for me? Because I'd never intended to go to grad school for philosophy first for my major. So I feel like just putting yourself in a position will like help make an opportunity for more people. So taking those steps myself.
So it's like leadership, right? You're sort of demonstrating, providing social proof.
But also finding mentors that it can be really powerful to find a mentor that is your gender or your race that you can feel like you identify with and connect with. And so maybe working from a gender perspective to try to change some of these things, trying to find more women to act as mentors for incoming female students might be helpful.
That's an awesome idea, right? There's like now it's a solution. Maybe there's just needs like social proof that it's possible. I mean, I read a fascinating article about a guy Granovetter, like a sociologist, like how riots occur. People show up, protest, and somebody in the group has a threshold of 1, and they throw a rock. And the person next to them has a threshold, or excuse me, the threshold of 0. First guy throws a rock. Somebody's got a threshold of 1, so they'll throw a rock. Somebody else has got a threshold of 2. Until 100 people later, law-abiding, church-going guy sees no problem in reaching into the electronics store and doing what everyone else doing. It's that in reverse. That's part of what you're talking about. Right? Understanding the problem and starts with the ideas of providing like a mentorship network, getting into the solutions. So for another example, for your idea might be, so like interview women, are they considering this path? If not, why not? To diagnose the problem better. Does that make sense? Who else? That's it. Two ideas.
So, we have a wetland learning experience from middle and high school students, and we wanted to figure out how we can embed challenges to the racial and gender hierarchies, despite the fact that they're already doing a lot of different subjects, math, English, social studies, and so forth, all through the lens of creating infrastructure for learning for future people with physical equity. And it was a challenging sort of diversity of stuff that we were doing, so we went into it, and I wasn't sure how much headway we'd make in a short space of time. But I think we recognized right away that we had a lot of opportunities to embed things in the learning experiences that I think are going to change the entire process. So we're really. Do maybe you want to share some of?
Okay, so the school we were focused on minorities, specifically African American, and the position of ours was teachers, and you're looking at mostly white females. So you're embedding not only gender stereotypes that you teach, but also minority, the fact that white people are empowered. So this is something that we would think would be helpful to bring in volunteers for the community so that these students can look on them as role models, specifically role models of minorities, because that's one of the biggest issues is that young minorities don't have these role models to look up to. And we actually had talked about this in the previous class when we were also has a name here at the University of Akron, the local education organization. So that was one of my suggestions, so that they can see that this isn't the way things have to be.
So we need, we want to introduce like relatable social models to help people develop a sense of efficacy in the system. It's hugely important.
Talk about, because these are students who are going to be building experiential learning facility in the wetlands. So students who are designing this project for other students to come in later. So getting them thinking about their audience is potentially race and gender and not just this default massive white male students would involve, as they're teaching these multiple subjects, history, art, English, math, whatever, bringing in challenges to the white male canon, history that we teach and the literature that they teach and stuff, in order to help students identify themselves as potential experts, even though they're most of them are white.
Yeah, if it's locked, that's fine.
And allow them to feel a sense of expertise over the material, and then also being able to meet with their audience that they're building this for in terms of their specific race.
Probably a long day for you, huh? You're raging this week.
What discipline are you guys
That's to protect them or something. That's something that lost them, so we want to protect them. But that doesn't mean something.
Call me if you need anything.
Thank you.
Yeah.
we kind of focus our wasn't so gender and racial, it was more of looking at like professors, I guess in different majors being more authoritarian and authoritative. And focusing more on just regurgitating material
What's that?
instead of making it.
I'll pull my password. I've got all the passwords and stuff here. Yeah.
So let me make sure I'm hearing you right.
They're
So
right there. You got it.
you're identifying the problem as sort of an old school stand and deliver lecture,
Right,
non-interactive classroom style.
exactly.
Because you guys didn't get into like any possible solution, just still into the problem, which is okay.
Yeah, we were still into the problem because we recognized that like different majors have different methods of teaching from professors. So like the sociology, political science, more that way versus like that more science
There's a great TED Talk, I'm going to butcher his name, but just try, like Sugitra Mitra,